Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out on this nice, warm July evening. I was just talking to someone earlier about, 3 weeks ago, I was having a snowball battle in the Alps. My family lives over there in Germany, and now I'm back here, and it's never been hotter. Boy, brutal. Okay, so first of all, introductions. My name's Tom Shay. In my job, I'm a software engineer, but I'm also a Civil War nut, maybe historian, how you want to call it, and also on the board of directors of the Schuylkill County Historical Society. This is Dave Williams. You're also on the board of directors and a mining engineer of sorts, right? Yep. 48 years, there you go. So I think we have a good expert to talk about the actual mining operation. First of all, regarding comments and questions, if you have something, interrupt me. I'd rather have that than wait till the end and you're asking about things I said a half hour ago. So I have no problem with that. We can, quick questions are fine. My sincerest thanks go out to John Hoptack, first of all. He's from Orgersburg, Pennsylvania. He's now a ranger, historian at Gettysburg. He is the foremost person that I know that knows about the 48th Pennsylvania Infantry, which is the unit we'll be talking about tonight. Okay, well, first of all, Civil War people, if you don't know much about the Civil War, you probably still heard of Gettysburg, Vicksburg, Sharpsburg, but when someone mentions the Battle of the Crater, that definitely perks up people's ears. I mean, was it fought on a volcano, or what do you mean, the Battle of the Crater? So we're going to be here tonight to explain the whole thing to you. 160 years ago today, 200 miles to our south, in the outskirts of Petersburg, Virginia, Schuylkill County would be heard from today. And that's what we're going to hear to commemorate. We'll commemorate the memory and the historic actions of our Schuylkill County soldiers. Blue and Gray magazine, in talking about the Battle of the Crater, quote, one of the most brutal contests of the Civil War, displaying on one hand the worst attributes of mankind, and on the other hand, the ingenuity that made America the greatest country on the globe. The ingenuity and the hard work were the Schuylkill Countyans. The after attack is what they're referring to regarding the worst attributes of mankind. General Grant, Ulysses S. Grant, commander of the Union Army, his comment, it was the saddest affair I ever witnessed in the war. National Park Service of Petersburg frames it, worst human behavior of the war. And again, those are all in the actual battle rather than the digging of the tunnel, obviously. Now, to talk about the Battle of the Crater, we want to get you there first, so we want to talk about the 48th Pennsylvania Infantry. That's the unit that we'll be focusing on during the program. The origin begins with the Washington Artillery. In Schuylkill County, though, there were a couple other militia units. In the 1830s, the National Light Infantry was the most popular. However, the story begins of the 48th, more or less in 1842. 20-year-old James Noggle, 20 years old, he's over swimming. He'd go over in the summer over Tunnington Dam with a bunch of his buddies, and they'd swim and they'd do calisthenics, things of that sort. And eventually the idea hits him, why don't we form a militia? So him and his buddies get together. It's an informal kind of group, but eventually it would evolve into the Washington Artillery. James Noggle had no military background. He was just merely a house painter. In 1846, the Mexican War begins, War with Mexico. Noggle and his men look to volunteer to join up, but they're declined. The men aren't needed. 1 year later, 1847, however, the governor of Pennsylvania, he calls for 2 regiments to be formed from Pennsylvania troops. And Noggle and his men, of course, will volunteer. The Washington Artillery, which was his company, they become a company in the 1st Volunteer Pennsylvania Regiment. And they go on to fight in Mexico, from Veracruz all the way across Mexico to the capture of Mexico City. When they're done, the war is over, Noggle returns, and he returns, he's being feted as a hero. The Whig Party, which was a popular political party at the time, they'll present him with a sword, and he'll treasure that sword the rest of his life. That sword today is at the Schuylkill County Historical Society. This is a picture of James Noggle. There he is wearing his sword. Also, when they made a monument for the 48th Pennsylvania at the Antietam battlefield, which is down in Maryland, they put on top of that monument James Noggle, And they featured his sword also, so it's down there also. It was actually rebuilt. It was missing for many years. John Hoptack led the effort to restore the statue with the sword back on it. So it's memorialized down there to this day. At the outbreak of the war, Captain James Wren is in command of the Washington Artillery. In April of 1861, the men from Schuylkill County, Washington Artillery, and 4 other units head down to Washington. There's no one defending Washington. These men will become known as the first defenders. They pass through Baltimore. There's where Nicholas Biddle, who is a servant for Captain Wren, he's hit on the head with a paving stone and acknowledges the first casualty of the Civil War. They arrive in Washington and they serve 90 days, which was their term of enlistment, without any further action. However, Governor Curtin commissions James Noggle to raise a 3-year regiment. Okay, that's going to be the 48th Pennsylvania. 48th has a long storied history. Their dead are buried in 7 different states. There's other units also, the 96th Pennsylvania, which comes from Schuylkill County, and several others. One of the more humorous stories you may have heard of is the men of the 96th, when they would run into the men of the 48th on their marches and things, the 96th would always tell them it takes 2 48s to make a 96. The Washington Artillery under Captain Wren becomes Company B of the 48th Pennsylvania. In August and September of 61, they're organized. They're sent down to Virginia. Noggle has become the colonel. So he's colonel of the 48th, James Noggle. He has 2 other brothers who are officers in the unit, and 2 other brothers, Abraham and Levi, are musicians. So it's 5 Noggle brothers in the 48th. Some of the men are immigrants. Many of them, though, do come born and raised in Schuylkill County. They're shipped down to Virginia and then down to North Carolina, and many of them get seasick. It's their first time at sea. Their first battle is in New Bern in North Carolina. They don't see action, but they receive the accolades for carrying forward the ammunition for the men in the front lines, so they're enduring fire without being able to return fire. They'll stay there until 1862. Eventually, they're going to end up at Northern Virginia, and it'll be their first major fight. It'll be the Second Battle of Bull Run in August of 1862. James Noggle is their brigade commander, and what happens there is a pretty interesting story is how he gets the men. They'll charge up a slope into Stonewall Jackson's lines, very good, excellent rebel troops with the brigade. They'll break through the line, the 48th will. One of the few times you'll see that happen against Stonewall Jackson's men. As they break through the line, they'll begin to take fire from behind. So the commanders and the officers in the 48th begin to say, wave our flags, our men are firing at us. They send men back and they realize, no, there are rebels behind us, we're surrounded. They just pretty much have to skedaddle. As they get out of there, what they had done going into the battle, they left their knapsacks on the field down at the bottom of the slope. Rebels counterattack and gather up all their letters and everything else that's in their knapsacks. And they also captured James Noggle's horse, which has been tied down there. This is their worst losses as far as beginning of the battles here and things that they're going to get involved in. Of 150 men become casualties. That was essentially their baptism of fire. September 1862, they're in Maryland now, fighting in the Battle of South Mountain. There they have 11 men wounded and 1 missing. Next, they're at the Battle of Antietam, bloodiest day of the American Civil War. There, they're fighting at a bridge that eventually became known as Burnside's Bridge on the southern end of the field. And they're going to lose 8 killed, 51 wounded, and 1 missing for a total of 60. Next, in December of 62, they're going to be at the Battle of Fredericksburg. And there they're going to lose over 50 casualties. In the city of Fredericksburg, they camp for the night. There's been artillery shelling during the day. And as the men are sleeping along the streets, 2 of the men are killed by a chimney that falls down and kills them on the spot. So kind of a sad ending, outside the actual fighting. In 1863, the war's now been going on for almost 2 years now. And a lot of the people are the soldiers become disappointed as far as this war's never going to end. Joshua Siegfried, picture of him. He'll now command the 48th. He's buried in the cemetery, not too far from about 100 yards from here. He went on eventually at the Battle of the Crater, we'll talk about him, he gets to lead a brigade of USCT troops, which is United States Colored Troops. They're black soldiers, of course, officered by white men at the time. And so we'll pick up more on him, but he's now commanding the 48th. It's now time, we'll introduce the, I guess the main character, let's say, and that will be Henry Pleasants. This is Henry Pleasants. He's also buried in a cemetery about 150 yards away from us here. He was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, of all things. His dad was a merchant, and his mother was reportedly a daughter of Spanish nobles. His father dies when he's 11, so he's sent to live with an uncle in Germantown, outside of Philadelphia. He doesn't speak a word of English when he arrives in Germantown. However, he goes to school, learns engineering, and begins to work for the Pennsylvania Railroad. 1857, he moves to Pottsville. He becomes a civil engineer, working for the local mining industry. In 1860, he will marry Sarah Sally Bannon, daughter of the publisher of the local newspaper, Benjamin Bannon. I know many of you, if you know anything about Molly Maguire's history, you'll recognize that name because Benjamin Bannon pretty much hated the Irish, especially the Mollies, and he really wrote a lot of anti-Irish articles in his paper. Sally Bannon, his wife, will die of illness on October 15th of the same year. It's tradition, kind of apocryphal probably, that he eventually joined the army just to kind of end his life pretty much. He wanted to finish up his life and he didn't want to live any longer. We're not sure how true that story is. He enters the war as a captain of Company C in the 48th, Pleasants does. 1864, he's risen to lieutenant colonel and commands the 48th. Meanwhile, I should have mentioned that also. Well, they eventually go out to Kentucky for a while. They're on provost duty out there, which is kind of like a policing outfit. So while they're out there, Pleasants will meet and fall in love with a young lady named Anne Shaw. When the regiment goes on furlough, he'll marry her, and so he does have a second wife. Now, the 48th eventually will do some fighting in East Tennessee, and then it'll eventually have, because its terms are expiring, they're asking the men now who want to re-enlist, they'll be allowed to go home and help recruit new recruits to make up for all the losses. 275 men do re-enlist, about 40 to 50 do not re-enlist. Those men that do re-enlist, they're here back in the county between February and March of 1864. They go home to recruit, and they're getting a lot of the younger men, 18, 19-year-olds that weren't of age at the time when the war started. But unfortunately for many of them, the war is really going to take a turn for the worse. There's not going to be a lot of room for heroism and surviving. The casualties are really going to mount in 1864, but of course they don't know that yet. General Grant, he's the overall commander of the federal troops. He will launch a campaign called the Overland Campaign, where they're going to go into Virginia and just hammer away for over 6 weeks of battle after battle. I have a map here that I know you can't see it, but let me rest that down there. Sorry about that. Just want to make sure you understand the geography here. This is important. This Washington, D.C. is up here. They're going to fight their way all the way down until they get to Petersburg. That's where we're going to stop, and I'll have Dave take over. However, they're going to fight at the Wilderness in Spotsylvania first. They're going to lose over 150 men in those fights alone. Next, they're going to, Grant is relentless. He will attack, be pushed back, and move south again. He'll continue to try to drive down toward Richmond. Richmond is his goal at the time. They'll fight at the North Anna River. At Cold Harbor, again, the 48th will lose 60 to 70 men, including, in one day, 3 officers killed by sharpshooters. 3 different officers get killed, which really decimates the morale of the men to lose your officers. They're the ones that keep they're the glue that keeps the unit together. They'll move south even further, and eventually they're going to arrive near Richmond, but they're not going to be able to take Richmond. Grant decides, instead of attacking, he's going to go around Richmond. He wants to take Petersburg. If you can own Petersburg, you can prevent supplies from getting into Richmond. So Petersburg will be the goal. that's what we're going to focus on for the rest of the program. On June 17th, 1864, Union will launch an attack. And in that attack, Curtis Pollock will be one of the ones wounded. He's wounded and killed. He'll die. His burial is again down here, about 100 yards just down the road here. He's buried here. But Curtis Pollock is one of many, who will be a casualty in that campaign. Also on that day, June 17th, 1864, 48th gets 2 Medal of Honor winners. Okay, they earn the Medal of Honor. Private Robert Reed, Company G, capturing the Confederate battle flag. Also, Corporal Patrick Monahan of Company F. He recaptures a Union flag that had been captured by the Confederates. Josser Siegfried is going to go to Brigade Command. That's where he'll command those USCT troops I talked about in the coming battle. And Henry Pleasants will be the commander of the 48th. Now, they're stuck in front of Petersburg now. It's almost a World War I type of setting. What are they going to do? How is the Union going to break through this front? And that's where the 48th has the idea, and we'll go